A mild miscalculation. During a senior graduation trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, I knew I wanted to party with my classmates, but I'd never been one to drink alcohol. Instead, someone I considered a friend had offered me seeds, which were claimed to be a morning glory plant, and I planned to perform a crude LSA extraction. I soaked 180 seeds in water for a day and then heated them in a small pan with vodka to about 200 degrees. I let the mixture cool and mixed it into a water bottle. I drank the contents. It was slightly sweet yet noticeably bitter, somewhat like a cherry that had been soured and been dipped in a bitterant. The concoction felt powerful as I ingested it, and I was filled with an anticipatory dread similar to the first time I smelled ayahuasca. I was in the passenger seat rolling a blunt on a Frisbee as we drove to the main street in North Myrtle Beach on a pleasant Monday in June 2009. The car stopped as we arrived at our destination, and I essentially collapsed out of the passenger seat, spilling the contents of the Frisbee on the sidewalk, all while a marked police car was 2 parking spots ahead. Although the officer was getting out of his car, he seemed not to notice, and I was ushered into the house. My vision closed in as I was walking up the wraparound porch steps to the 3rd-story beach house. This was my last memory for almost 48 hours. The rest of the story has been corroborated by multiple friends/witnesses and the police report. My behavior was consistently inappropriate and hostile. I was forced to leave the house party, and some friends took me to a hotel lobby bathroom to hide me and try to communicate with me. I escaped the bathroom but could hardly walk and laid down on the hotel lobby floor. The front desk attendant stated he would call the police as I was drunk and disorderly. Someone threw a 2-liter bottle of soda from a landing a few stories up that almost hit my head, and when orange soda exploded all over the lobby floor, we were chased out of the hotel. At this point, my friends left me, and I was told I wandered onto the beach sometime after dark. The police report states that I was standing in the middle of the main drag in my underwear soaked with seawater, directing traffic while holding a dead fish that I must have found in a chum bucket on the beach. I was arrested by Officer P, and while I was sitting handcuffed on the curb, I slurred out, "What did I do, officer? Did I get you pregnant?" Apparently there was some sexual overtones to this drug. It was at this point she miraculously realized that I was not drunk, but in fact poisoned and in immediate need of paramedics. I was transported to the nearest hospital and given antipsychotic medication, of which I unfortunately cannot remember the name, but which absolutely saved my life. The first glimpse of consciousness I had was waking up in a bright hospital room with a catheter and IV lines. I must have removed these because the next thing I remember is running down a hallway in my hospital gown and swinging open the exit doors. I made it a few hundred feet into the parking lot before security apprehended me and escorted me back to my hospital room. Apparently, I made other attempts at escape until I was handcuffed to my bed and an officer or nurse was directed to watch me around the clock. After some 2 days in the hospital, I convinced the staff that my drink had been spiked, and no charges were filed against me as I had no other drugs in my system. Thus, the hospital classified my episode as an accidental poisoning. I also convinced them that I was no longer hallucinating. Our class president came and picked me up as I was discharged from the hospital on Thursday. I was convinced there were strangers in the backseat of the van and opened the door in order to jump out of the moving vehicle. My friend restrained me, pulled over, and graciously let me inspect the vehicle before continuing to drive me back to our campsite. I saw countless animals and people that did not exist for the next day. Although my consciousness had returned, my sanity had not. I ran from imaginary creatures and hid behind trees, crawled under cars, and sobbed in my tent. I swam in the ocean and shrieked on the beach when I felt I was being attacked by a flock of imaginary birds. My antics were primarily confined to the time after sunset because direct sunlight was incredibly painful to my eyes. By the 5th day, the hallucinations had ceased. I went out on the last night of this week-long bacchanalia with the friends that I had, for the most part, ensured my survival until they were fed up with my antics and let me roam a dark beach while experiencing true delusional hallucinations. That night I heard endless accounts of my actions. I actually ran into my arresting officer on the sidewalk, and she asked if I was feeling better. If someone claims to have identified a plant that contains LSA, such as morning glory, be aware that it could in fact be a deadly Datura seed pod. Since this trip, I have gone on to study botany and horticulture, specifically plant toxicity as it relates to pest control. I wrote a research paper on Datura Stramonium and have participated in clinical studies of actual psychedelics. I will never, ever ingest a nightshade again.